my daughter Emily, who just turned 18, and I stood by as my wife Tiffany and her boss Ryan, who is 25, packed her suitcases into his car. He'd come to pick her up on Sunday morning for a Monday meeting in Los Angeles. They were catching a flight that evening, needing to be in town for meetings before some big negotiations. Tiffany, who is 44 and has been married to Ryan for 25 years, was still striking at 5 feet 7 inches tall with dark brown hair and deep blue eyes despite adding a few pounds over the years. She kept her slim, curvy figure, which always caught people's attention. We got married right after high school, and I worked hard to support her through college, taking online courses myself. Childbirth didn't really change her looks. After she graduated from law school, we moved back to Alamance County to be near family. By then, we had 2 kids, and Emily came along during Tiffany's first year as a lawyer. I watched Ryan with a knot of emotions in my gut. I disliked that arrogant. He had this smirk on his face, and he was so sure of himself. I wanted to confront him, but I held back. I knew it wouldn't do any good. They were both heading out for a civil case, but thanks to a tip from a woman named Rachel, I knew there was more going on. I had already been tipped off about their alternative plans. Tiffany and Ryan had turned down our offer to drive them to the airport. They preferred the comfort of his car, which irritated me. I had no idea when they'd be back. Ryan and I were pretty similar in terms of age, height, and build. However, I was ready for a confrontation if it came to that. Emily must have noticed my growing frustration and stopped me from doing something I might regret. We waved goodbye from the porch as Tiffany likely looked forward to whatever awaited her in Los Angeles. Tiffany's promotion to associate partner at the firm 2 years ago had turned our lives upside down. The power went straight to her head, though she kept it well hidden from everyone but me. It was Rachel, Ryan's wife, who had reached out to me, spilling the details about his string of affairs with women at work. She said this was the last straw and that she and her father had set a trap after Ryan's car finally disappeared down the road. Emily and I went back inside. "Does Mom have any idea what we know?" Emily asked me. "Is Ryan just adding her too?" "I don't think so. His list probably not. Even with all that legal training, she doesn't take rumors seriously and thinks she can keep it under control. To her, it's probably just an exciting break from the routine. She'll get a rude awakening when she realizes she's just another fling for him." Emily frowned. "So why didn't you stop her? If you knew, you'd know your mom," I replied. "If I tried to warn her, she'd just brush it off. Call me jealous, but I think it's time. He's not open to changing his mind, is he?" "Does his wife know?" Emily asked. "Yeah, she knows, and so does her dad," I said. "They're ready to catch him in the ACT. It's not his first time. Rachel's had enough. Her kids are grown, and she's done with the whole charade." "Will you forgive her, Mom?" Emily asked, looking worried. I said firmly, "I forgave her once, but this is different. It's time to move on. Divorce has been on the table since she left this morning." I'll never forget the look on my daughter's face. Like her siblings, she had no idea about her mother's past. Learning about her infidelity must have hit her hard. "Dad, you've got to explain," she urged. "I don't get it. You're the youngest." "Emily, keep this between us," I said. "Before you were born, your mom cheated. She kept it hidden until she got pregnant. If a test hadn't confirmed you were mine, I would have left. Luckily, the paternity test proved you were Emily." She looked stunned. "Only 3 people in the family knew about the secret, and we'd kept it buried for years." "Who is he?" "We don't know him," she asked. "It's been 18 years since I spoke to him," I replied. "Your Uncle Rick? You and the other kids call him Uncle Rick." Emily took a moment to process the revelation. She now understood why I always kept my distance from family events with Rick. Why her grandparents split Christmas between him and me. It all made sense now. You could text Rick about Tiffany's trip and stir things up. I joked that I could go up if she wanted, then I went to the kitchen, made coffee and grabbed the local paper. I scanned it for new listings, rentals and houses with Emily, who is going to college soon. Tiffany could stay there until she graduates, but I needed to move before her return. I knew Judge Wallace would prioritize the kids' needs in the divorce, so I had to plan ahead. Emily's phone buzzed and she spoke quietly for a bit. Uncle Rick confessed to everything, she told me later. He feels for after 18 years. I thought it was time to hear his side of the story. Tiffany's actions had forced me to revisit the past, and though I felt betrayed, I'd stayed for the kids, hoping to keep our home intact. I asked Emily to drive me to meet Rick. We had our usual spot, an old fishing hole on our father's land, where we sat by the fire and passed the bottle between us. Rick laid it all out. His version was different from Tiffany's, but I figured the truth was somewhere in between. In the end, I didn't care anymore. Hearing Rick take responsibility was enough. I placed more of the blame on Tiffany. Rick had always been more of a follower than a leader. At some point, our father spotted the fire and, thinking we were trespassing, approached us with his old rifle. He ended up giving us a ride back to the farmhouse in Rick's truck. Mom whipped up some eggs and potatoes to help us sober up, just like when we were kids. By the time we'd finished eating, Mom had already called Emily and Rick's wife, Mary. When they arrived, we were in better shape. Mary, who married Rick after my parents' divorce, looked confused to see us together. "So, you finally made peace," Mary said. "After all these years, we deserve to know what caused the split." I opened my mouth to speak, but Rick nudged me. It was a signal to keep quiet. Rick had always been better at talking his way out. I was wrong. Tiffany and I found out that Rick had an affair while she was pregnant with Emily. He admitted that he was immature and foolish at the time. My younger brother, who is usually more level-headed, had caught us. Since then, he has not spoken to me. When I told my dad the truth about our falling out, he said, "Damn, if I were Marcus, I'd have gotten rid of you." My mom asked, "What made you spill the beans?" Tiffany flew to Los Angeles with her boss. They only booked one hotel room for the whole stay, which made us think there was more to it. Rachel Ryan's wife has hired private investigators. Emily knows what's going on, but it's tough for her to watch her mother acting all excited about this trip. "I should have let you confront him, Dad," my daughter said, locking eyes with me. There was a moment of silence before I continued. "Since Tiffany's keeping the house while Emily is in college, I need to find a new place before she comes back, Dad. I'm not staying with Mom," Emily declared firmly. "We're sticking together, no matter where you go." Emily had the same stubborn streak I had, and she meant every word, no matter what came next. "Come upstairs with me, Emily," Mom said. They disappeared for a while. When they returned, we had a new plan. We'd stay with my parents for the time being, and all we needed were our clothes. On the drive home, Emily gave me a hard time. "You've got to stop defending Mom," she said. "We're grown up." So, she knew what she was doing with Ryan in LA, thinking she wouldn't get caught. That says a lot about how she sees us when we got back home. That Monday night, we slowly started moving our stuff out, each of us taking what we cared most about: my rocking chair, her makeup table, the TV. Tiffany kept us updated throughout the week, though the progress was slow. Then, on Thursday, Rachel called and suggested we meet up in a nearby restaurant, Jack's Roadhouse, around 8. "I'll be there at 8. I'd say around 8 p.m. I arrived at work in my usual clothes, minus the tie. I recognized Rachel by the white scarf she was wearing. As I introduced myself, I was struck by her beauty. She was much younger than I expected, maybe 10 years my junior, with long blonde hair and soft blue eyes. She dressed conservatively but still looked great. It turned out she was a kindergarten teacher, which explained her simple outfit. I, on the other hand, worked as an HR manager at a nursing home, so my attire was more formal. Rachel, Tiffany, and Ryan would be in LA for the weekend, and about 70% of their work on the case was done. They'd be served legal papers as soon as they got back. She asked how I was holding up, and I told her this time felt different. We were discussing it openly, unlike last time when it all happened behind closed doors. I mentioned that my older brother Rick was part of the mess. 18 years ago, before Emily was even born, we hadn't spoken since then until My daughter made us patch things up last Sunday. That reunion left me with the worst hangover I'd had in years. Rachel chuckled as I added that what made it worse was our dad finding us like a couple of teenagers and dragging us home. Rachel found that amusing but commented on how nice it must have been to be with family again. I told her that Emily and I were staying with my parents for now and only brought along what was necessary. I also mentioned that I planned to kept Tiffany's number active until Sunday, when I'd block her for good before parting ways. Rachel and I went to a nearby bar and danced for a while despite everything. I left feeling pretty good, but that was until I got home and Emily started teasing me. She said, "Daddy's got a new girlfriend," clearly picking up on the chemistry between Rachel and me. Sunday dinner was special. My mom was thrilled to cook for us again, and we all ate well, leaving barely any leftovers. It was around 1:12 a.m. I got a call from Rachel. She told me that Tiffany and Ryan had been caught. Hotel detectives had walked in on them and everything had been filmed on hidden cameras. She sent me a copy of the video. I got up, dressed, and went downstairs to make tea. My mum joined me as I was finishing up. She asked if the water was still hot. I poured her a cup and showed her the video on my phone. I watched as her expression shifted. The footage was crystal clear. Tiffany and Ryan had been caught undressed under the sheets, looking like deer in headlights. Their shocked reactions made it was clear that they hadn't been acting innocently. My mum quickly saved a copy of the video to her phone. "We're done with Tiffany," my mum said firmly. "I can't wait to see the look on her face when she gets served with the lawsuit." Emily and I blocked her number tonight. I reminded her that night, my mum took Tiffany's phone and I helped her block all communication and share tea with her in the middle of the night. It brought back fond memories. Later, I instructed the receptionist to block any calls from Tiffany, as I didn't want to deal with her. The receptionist called to say she'd been trying to reach me every 20 minutes. "What should we do? What's your mobile number?" I asked, and she gave it to me. I replied that I'd send her a video clip if she called again. "Ask for her cell number," I said, "and once you get it, send her the video. Tell her that both Emily and I received it last night." That was the last I heard from Tiffany that day. Before leaving, the receptionist confirmed I did what you asked. She stopped calling after that. "I'll get the video to you if you or Emily need anything, just let me know." I nodded in agreement. "Thanks, boss," I muttered, keeping my thoughts to myself while my mum prepared dinner and Emily helped out in the kitchen. I briefed my daughter on a work incident when suddenly a text came through from an unfamiliar number claiming to be from my mum, asking me to call her. It didn't take long to realize it was probably Ryan's number. "I think your brothers might try to contact us around 8 o'clock. I'll be working late tonight. My guess is that your mom will reach out to them by now. They've probably realized we're not at the house. They'll be in for a surprise." Emily chuckled. I left a note for Mom saying she might want to make Ryan move out. Considering his wife kicked him out, it's funny because I know Tiffany will. We decided not to tell our brothers the truth. Emily suggested we turn off our phones for a while so they'd have to call Mom to figure out what's going on. That's exactly what we did, and we had a peaceful evening, even if it wasn't so calm for others later on. We learned that my sons had visited. They noticed that my favorite chair was gone. They searched the whole place when they found Emily's note in the kitchen. It became clear that we had moved out. They called us several times, but we didn't answer. Tiffany played dumb, saying she had no idea what the note meant or where we had gone. Eventually, they turned to Rick, who suggested that maybe I didn't want to be found, given what their mother had done. Strangely, they never thought to question how Rick knew. As the news of our breakup spread faster than gossip, I got a call at work from my eldest son, Cole. After my secretary connected us, he said, "No." After the initial pleasantries, I didn't waste any time. I told him I didn't have much to say. Everything that was wrong is now right, and vice versa. "Let's not get into religion, Dad." He sighed. "Just give me the facts. Check your texts. I sent you something that'll answer your questions. If you want to talk, forward it to Lloyd." I ended the call and sent the video of Tiffany and Ryan's affair, and let Emily know within 10 minutes. Cole responded with, "I'll be at Grandpa's by 8. My parents excused themselves when Cole and Lloyd arrived. They told me to talk through the situation with their mom. My sons didn't think her actions were that bad and told me to just move on. We all make mistakes, Dad. Remember how many times you forgave us when we were younger? This didn't go down well with their sister. You may be my brothers, but you're both idiots." Emily was really angry about this. "It wasn't an accident, Mom. Ryan planned everything. The hotel was booked as Mr. and Mrs. Ryan worked for a week before they left." Watching my sons' faces as Emily laid out the events was something I'll never forget. We watched Mom leave the house that Sunday afternoon, knowing she was going to cheat. She said she'd rather drive herself to the airport, so that's what she did. I think we were probably the subject of their jokes all the way to LA. She had no idea we knew what was going on. Emily turned to me and said, "Why didn't you stop her?" I explained that she would have lied and denied it all. Her mother's actions showed that she was already leaving the marriage. This wasn't an accident, it was premeditated. My dad and I knew about it 2 weeks before she left. Emily told us that's why we had video footage ready within an hour of serving them the lawsuits. Boys, you need to understand. Mom didn't just betray us. Dad, she's betrayed all of us. I looked at my children. I'm seeing a doctor tomorrow to get tested for STDs. Their stunned faces said it all. I can't be sure she didn't have other lovers on the side. This may be the first time she's been caught, but her frequent business trips raised suspicions. Dad, you can't, Lloyd said. Come on, Lloyd, let's be serious here. There's no way our mum had other lovers, given what we've learned. I said, can we trust her to tell the truth? Marcus, my father, made a good point. Given her job and all those trips, it's not out of the question that she had other partners. Business trips and mediations could have provided plenty of opportunities. I added that even if she had separate phones, those calls might have gone unnoticed. A call came in, so I stepped out of the conversation. I went out onto the veranda to answer Rachel's call. She told me about her recent conversation with Ryan. It didn't go well. She said he still doesn't understand why I'm divorcing him. He thinks I should just forgive and forget, but I made it clear I don't want him in our daughter's life anymore. When it finally sank in how much damage his actions had caused, she also mentioned that Tiffany was struggling now that she was unemployed. They'll be back on Thursday to settle everything. I blocked Tiffany's number, and the receptionist is turning down her calls. I even sent her the video you gave me so Rachel said she knows we're all aware. Ryan's stuff is in the garage until he picks it up, and I've changed the locks. We exchanged a few more words before saying goodnight. I went back to the kitchen, where my family was waiting for my next move. I'm taking tomorrow off. I announced I have a lawyer appointment at 9. I want to sue those two as soon as they get back. My son started crying when he realized what was going on. My father said, Ryan won't be the first, but he'll be the last. He added, That's not true. My brother Lloyd said, Dad, you're wrong. Mom, then Ed, until we showed her the video. My mother said, Ever wonder why? Your father never spoke to Uncle Rick until now. They made up last Sunday. Emily added that Rick said Dad didn't deserve what happened back then, but it happened. We talked about the family's history, and it was pretty tense. I put the kettle on, so my kids could think about everything. Later, after my sons left, I sat down with my parents for a quiet heart-to-heart. To be continued. They'll be watching how you handle this, my mom warned. What you do now will guide them. I understand, Mom. I replied that I'll stay calm and let the lawyers take care of things. I can't change the past, but I can control how I respond. The next day at the lawyer's office, I laid out the events leading us to this point. Her ears perked up when I mentioned Tiffany's employer. Did you know I once worked for that firm? She asked. They have a strict code of ethics. We might consider suing the firm as well, but we might not gain much besides covering legal fees. Still, it would. It could cause some real problems for them. I agreed to go ahead with it. They'd be back from LA on the earliest Thursday flight out of St. Louis after paying her fee. She seemed keen to take the case. I felt a bit like David facing Goliath. The company Tiffany worked for was the biggest in the area with multiple divisions. Later at the doctor's office, my family doctor seemed surprised by my request for STI tests. He agreed it was a smart move. Meanwhile, I learned that Cole had informed his mother about my tests. He didn't hold back, telling her that because of Rick and Ryan. There was still some doubt about how far her betrayals went that evening. Rachel and I met for dinner at Red Lobster. She greeted me with a warm smile, and we chatted casually. Rachel passed me an envelope as we sat down. It contained statements from 5 of Ryan's former subordinates. They detailed how he had coerced them into inappropriate situations. This strengthens our case. I had originally thought that just covering her fees would be enough, but now it looks like we could expose a wider pattern of misconduct. Rachel and I bonded over our shared experiences. As I returned home, it was almost midnight, and I was thinking about how much had changed since Tiffany left. I made tea for Emily and saw she was crying. I gave her a cup and said, "It's okay to cry. It's part of healing." She hugged me tight and let out all the emotion she'd been holding in. We finished our tea and she seemed calmer. She asked me a few questions and I told her we were just getting to know each other and that it felt like the start of a solid friendship. The next day I gave the statements to my lawyer, who suggested we turn them into a class action lawsuit. I agreed to turn the case into a class action lawsuit, hoping it would bring more accountability. Later, I heard that Tiffany and Ryan's return wasn't smooth despite the settlement. Their actions had made headlines, overshadowing any sense of victory. On my way home, I withdrew some cash and surprised my mom with $1. She gave me a look that only a mother could give. It was to help with the extra expenses while we're staying here. I explained that it would have cost me way more anywhere else. "This is a one-time thing." I nodded, grateful for her support. Tiffany returned to an empty house feeling like an outcast after a day full of hostility. Both she and Ryan were unwelcome. Marcus and his attorney were suing the entire firm. Tiffany couldn't wrap her mind around how Marcus had found a former employee to represent him. That person would never have made partner otherwise. It was mostly about the lawsuit, but also that Marcus had hired someone who knew all the firm's legal tricks, putting them at a disadvantage from the start. After mixing herself a strong cocktail, Tiffany sat down and started reading through the divorce petition. The reality hit her hard. Marcus and Emily had known about her and Ryan's plans when they left for Los Angeles. Now she had to face the end of her marriage. She sent Marcus and Emily a text, realizing the damage was done. She hoped to buy some time, thinking that if Marcus calmed down, they might talk. But Cole's words kept coming back to her. Her actions now seemed deceitful to everyone, and it wasn't worth all the pain she was causing. While sorting through the mail, she found a letter from the county health department, revealing she had contracted an STD. She was overwhelmed. She broke down in tears, realizing that this nightmare was only getting worse. Her past business trip encounters would now make her family think even less of her. Meanwhile, Ryan sat at a bar on the edge of town, drowning his sorrows. Rachel had filed for divorce, and as he reflected on everything, he didn't even notice the man who had quietly taken a seat beside him. Suddenly, there was a commotion, and in the chaos, Ryan was hit 3 times. Marcus's words echoed in his head, making it clear why he had been attacked back at my father's barn. I was working on some chores one Saturday afternoon when my eldest son Cole showed up. He was insistent that I should take his mother Tiffany back, despite the chaos her actions had caused. There was no point in arguing. I let him vent until he was done. I began, "Imagine you were married. You found out your wife was being unfaithful. Would you still be giving the same advice?" His silence said everything. I continued, "You're telling me to accept being with someone who betrayed me. Does that mean you think I'm insignificant? Someone to be walked over?" The shock on his face was undeniable. Seeing his distress, I said firmly, "If you can't respect my decisions, then don't come back." I left him standing there, knowing he needed time to process what I said. He turned to his uncle, Rick, for advice. Rick admitted, Cole, your mother came after me, not the other way around. I fell for her, and it led to 18 years of separation from my brother. There are two sides to every story. Your dad is right. Your mother didn't get that STD from Ryan, she brought it. She showed she didn't value your father after everything he did for this family. Fix this before you lose your dad forever. Monday morning at the firm where Tiffany and Ryan worked, the atmosphere was triumphant. My lawsuit had been dropped, and they were back in good standing, receiving praise for their successful case settlements despite his injuries from the bar fight. Ryan pressed on, privately sharing the ordeal with Tiffany. Later that day, as I left the nursing home where I worked, I found Tiffany waiting by my car. She looked exhausted and defeated. Back off, she snapped. Ryan's got enough problems. Thanks to your little revenge scheme, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm just playing cool, I replied. He jumped. She insisted the guy said he was your friend and that we keep doing it. I couldn't help but laugh. Once I composed myself, I said, if I knew who did it, I'd buy them a whiskey. If I were you, your lover would be dead. I got an urgent text from Rachel asking me to come over right away. I quickly told Tiffany to get her lawyer and finalized the divorce without another word. I drove off, done with her lies and manipulations. When I arrived at Rachel's place, she looked visibly upset. What's wrong? I asked. One of your dad's friends punched Ryan using your name. She said I couldn't hide my grin, which made Rachel look a bit better. Are you mad at me? She asked. No, I said. I just wish I knew where he lives so I could send him a bottle of whiskey. Rachel laughed as I hugged her for a second before I could say sorry. She gave me a kiss on the cheek. They're both inside waiting to talk to you, she said, leading me into the kitchen and still holding my hand. Her two daughters, Lucia and Lisa, came out of their room. Lisa and her mom came out of their room, and I winked at them playfully, which they returned. Rachel's dad was a tall, imposing man, and he greeted me with a smile. I went over and said, if I could, I'd send you a big bottle of whiskey as a thank you. He accepted a handshake and added, think before you do anything foolish. My dad saved me trouble when I was your age, and there was a lot of tension. Formal introductions followed, and it wasn't long before it was time for him to take his grandson home, which left Rachel, her daughter, and me. The girls excitedly introduced themselves, telling me about their favorite restaurant and an all-you-can-eat pizza place called Papados. I knelt down and asked if they would like me to treat them and their mom to dinner there. They eagerly agreed, probably influenced by my casual attire. I just need to call my mom and let her know I won't be home for dinner, I said with a smile at the restaurant. Rachel's colleagues waved at her while she grabbed more pizza. Meanwhile, Lucia turned to me and asked, are you Mom's boyfriend? I smiled and replied, I'm just a guy. Her friend asked, did you go on a date? She replied, not yet, but I need permission from someone special first. Lisa asked, who? I said, which made them laugh. They giggled and said, you can because... By the time Rachel got back with more food, Mum had already said she liked you. Lisa asked if I could get her dessert. After we finished at the restaurant, I thanked them at their front door. The girls went inside, ready for bed, feeling a bit awkward. I was about to say goodnight when Rachel called after me, stopping me on the steps. She leaned in and kissed me. I couldn't help but respond. My daughter said you were going to ask me out. Rachel revealed with a grin. Lucia got it wrong, I explained, but I did think about it while you were busy with your colleague. We sat on the porch like teenagers talking about our feelings and where things might go from here with September winding down. We planned to take the girls to the town fair the following Saturday. We agreed to figure out our next step afterwards. It was nearly 10 o'clock. When I got back to my parents' farm at 10, Emily noticed my upbeat mood. She said it looked like my dad was grinning because the meeting must have been important. I filled my parents and Emily in on what had happened that day. My dad thought it was funny that Tiffany had asked me to back off from Ryan. On Friday, my lawyer filed a new lawsuit against the firm for senior partners and 16 women where jointly the claim was hand-delivered to the partners' homes. 3 of them were barred from returning by their spouses. My attorney, Linda O'Neill, was relentless in her pursuit of information. This included finding out who Tiffany's divorce lawyer was. My mom even emailed Tiffany's relatives. She informed them about how Tiffany and Ryan were served with the lawsuit. She revealed that this wasn't Tiffany's first affair. I mentioned my STD diagnosis as I was getting ready to pick up Rachel and the kids for the fair. Emily said, "You're really into Rachel, aren't you, Dad?" I said that since the divorce started, many of the friends your mom and I shared have faded away. Rachel and I bonded over our shared experiences, which made it easy to trust her. I don't know where things are headed, but I'm open to the possibilities. If you need any dating tips, just ask Emily. She'll give you the lowdown. I spent an hour on the Ferris wheel with Rachel's daughters, who loved it. We ate a lot of food with Lisa perched on my shoulders most of the time. After that, we ran into Rick and his wife Mary, who introduced their kids to us. The kids hit it off, leaving us adults to chat by the s.p.m. The girls were tired after bathing and putting them to bed. Rachel got a call from Ryan. He was in the ER again after being punched. Rachel told him it wasn't me. I'd spent the day at the fair with her and the girls. Ryan wasn't happy. I left Rachel's house around 9 p.m. On Sunday afternoon, I picked up Rachel and her daughters and we headed to Rick's place. My whole family was there, including Emily, who had brought her date. It was a big moment for Rick having me in his home for the first time since he got married. Mary warmly introduced Rachel and her girls and they were quickly welcomed. Things took a turn when Cole pulled me aside. "Dad, I messed up." He admitted that he'd fallen for Mom's manipulation. "Uncle Rick and my colleagues filled me in last week." "What did you learn from this?" I asked, curious to hear what he had to say when it comes to family. Cole said that sometimes it's best to keep your distance. No matter what you do, you might just make things worse. They need to figure things out on their own time, not yours. You're right, but it's tough because I care so much. I said that your mom and I will talk one day, but not anytime soon, given how she's been acting. Cole nodded in agreement. He said that her behavior speaks for itself. It does. Look at Rachel. I continued, saying that she endured a loveless marriage until she felt ready to raise her daughters on her own. She showed patience until the time was right, and her actions reflect her character. Your mom's behavior shocked Emily and me with its cruelty. She says one thing, though. Her actions tell a different story, as Grandpa used to say. I added, if I'm not worth the truth, then you're not worth lying to. Dad, here's a tough question. What else did she lie about? That's something we may never fully know, I replied. There's no use dwelling on the past, son. All we can do is learn from it and move forward. I'm really impressed by Rachel. Dad, Cole admitted, but the more I hear about, the more I think about it, the more I think Mom and Ryan are a good match for each other. Emily came over and said we were attracting a lot of attention. Maybe we can finish this conversation later? I told her we were done. Cole said we just needed to talk to Dad, and then he walked away. Emily looked curious, like she wanted to know more. I told her it's good to see he owned up to it. Rick and Mary were enjoying dinner with their family, and Mary took lots of pictures, especially when Lisa kept a close eye on me when the inevitable water fight broke out. I joined in with great enthusiasm, though it ended with me soaked and resting in a lounge chair to dry off. Lisa climbed into my lap and fell asleep. I glanced over and saw Mary and Rachel chatting, likely about My father joined me as this little one seems to have picked up on it. Just make sure there's no malice in your motives. I chuckled and recounted the journey of my relationship with Rachel, starting from her first phone call. He nodded thoughtfully. I should have trusted my instincts back then. He then revealed that your mother had asked him to talk to me. Whatever path you choose, know that we support you. Dad, look at the world today, I said. Changing the subject, a Democrat who represents the values of JFK has won the presidency, but conservative members of Congress are stepping down. The GOP now represents Kennedy's views, but the media brands him a traitor. They're trying to impeach him even though he's consistent. Meanwhile, they back a candidate with the same actions they accuse him of. What message does that send? They share the same disregard for truth and morality as my former in-laws. My wife and I continued to hold the view that only people behind bars have any real value. We also thought that they only showed remorse when they were trying to get out of trouble. My dad used to say that people should flush 100% of the media's truths down the toilet. He also thought that real honesty was hard to find these days. However, he was amazed to see two factions of Democrats at each other's throats. Despite all that, it was amazing to see them at each other's throats. I'm starting to think that the real problem with him is that he's just too competent. Strong words, I know, but it just goes to show how powerful the media is as a propaganda tool. The following Monday, while I was in my office, a detective came by to discuss the ongoing issue with Ryan. It took about an hour to go over everything I knew, and I gave him a list of women whose husbands had discovered Ryan's affairs. I said, "You should speak with Linda O'Neill. She has more details on this. It's been over 6 weeks since I found out about their relationship. Ryan's wife, Rachel, was the one who tipped me off." The detective nodded, noting everything down. "Brian seems to blame you for ruining his marriage is a different story. It seems like he's the kind of guy who can't take responsibility for his own actions." After the detective left, I called Linda to give her a heads up. She expected something like this from Ryan. He was always trying to set people up, and she believed he was the reason she had been dismissed from the firm later that evening. I got back to my folks' place and found out that it was my mum's letter that finally made Tiffany give up. Up until then, she thought there was still a chance we could work things out on Wednesday. Emily and I took Rachel and her daughters to dinner at the pasta house, and my son joined us for the meal. I told them the news about Tiffany. Rachel's daughters were really happy to have Emily there with them, and the dinner was a success. 2 months had passed since our last family meeting, and on Friday afternoon I was sitting next to Linda O'Neill in court waiting to be called before Judge Robin McCullough, with Tiffany and her lawyer from the firm on the other side. We'd already agreed on the property division, and since there was no mortgage, it was a straightforward process. Tiffany would buy out my share of the house and give me half of our joint savings. Once called before the judge, we confirmed our agreement and finalized the divorce on my way out. Tiffany stopped me on the steps and said, "I ruined myself. I finally told the boys everything, and Emily still won't speak to me. She thinks I did all of this on purpose." I could accept that explanation from Emily because of her inexperience. I replied, "From an adult it sounds superficial." Rachel's divorce had already been finalized, and she got everything she could from Ryan. He was ordered to pay $1. I also agreed to pay $1,000 a month in child support, $1,500 for each child until they turned 18, and half of their college expenses. The house was to be sold, with the profits split. Ryan had left the company and moved to another city, likely tired of his constant encounters with angry people at his former firm. He was set for life. One evening, my parents invited Rachel and her daughters over for dinner. To our surprise, they had also invited her parents, since our relationship was becoming more serious. They thought it was time to get to know her family. Linda O'Neill had negotiated with the firm's insurance company, and it looked like our case would be settled out of court after paying Linda her 30% fee. We were each set to receive over $750,000 that night as we sat around the formal dining room table, which hadn't been used in years. I stood up, pushed back my chair and got down on one knee, taking out a small box. I asked Rachel, "Will you take a second chance? And marry me?" Rachel, completely shocked, said yes. That's when the real celebration began. Mom had to call Rick, Mary, and my 2 sons to share the good news, and they arrived within half an hour, in the middle of all the excitement. I noticed Lisa sitting quietly on the floor, tears in her eyes. I walked over and sat down beside her. She immediately climbed into my lap. "What's wrong, baby?" I asked gently. "Nothing," she whispered. "I'm just happy you're going to be my dad." I looked over at Rachel. Rachel had tears in her eyes too, and I knew she could see them in mine. I stood up holding Lisa and walked over to her mother. Everyone understood how important that moment was. Lucia came over and stood next to us. She asked softly, "Dad, when you and Mum get married, will we take your last name too, as soon as the court allows?" I promised Lucia, and Lisa turned to my father, who smiled and said, "From now on, you can call us Grandma and Grandpa." I could already imagine my daughters spending time together. At the farm, they were learning how to ride horses with my dad. They were going to love it later on. In private, Rachel asked how I was going to convince Ryan to let me adopt the girls and change their last name. "Leave that to me," I said confidently. A month later, I showed up at Ryan's office unannounced. His secretary told me to go right in. When I closed the door behind me, I could see his face had healed, but the damage was still visible. He'd been punched 8 times. While the detective had already interviewed all of his former girlfriends and their husbands, but there were no solid suspects. "Rachel and I are getting married," I told him. He looked up, his face pale, and I could tell he believed I was behind his injuries. "What do you want?" he asked, nervously. "I need your permission to legally adopt your daughters so they can take my last name." Lucia asked her mother and me if she and her sister could take my name. "This has to be done legally, recognizing us both. As their fathers, why should I agree to this?" he asked. "Because if you do, I'll stay out of your life for good." I said that if you don't, well, we might cross paths a lot more. It took him half an hour to type up the document and sign it. His secretary, who was also a notary, stamped it. I knew he didn't care much for the girls as he hadn't seen them since he left for Los Angeles later that day. I stopped by the school where Rachel taught. I had to go to the office because they didn't know me. But when they called her class, she came to the office, surprised to see me. "Rachel, I made a promise to your daughters the day I proposed," I said, handing her an envelope. "I think this will help us give them what they want." She opened it, and her eyes filled with tears as she read the document. "How did you manage this?" she asked Ryan. "He thinks I'm responsible for his face." When I met those fists, I said I'd use that to our advantage. I thought we could make it official on our wedding day. Lucia and Lisa can legally take my last name. Emily was right when she said I should keep my promise, especially to a child. I did it later that afternoon. We met with Linda to finalize the adoption. The documents were ready in just 20 minutes and filed with the court. A week later, we found out the adoption would be approved and the girls would officially become walkers. We held a family meeting to announce that in 2 weeks, 6 days before Christmas, Rachel and I would exchange vows and the adoption would be finalized. Lucia and Lisa were over the moon, and my parents were really excited to meet their new granddaughters that night. As we sat by the fire, Lucia climbed onto my lap and said, "Thank you, Dad, for what I asked for. Thank you for loving us enough to keep your promise." I was so moved that I couldn't speak, so I just held her close, grateful for the family we were building together.